My husband forced a hard plastic smile trainer into my mouth last night because my grief over my mother's death was ruining his brand image, and he left me in the dark to learn how to be happy again. By the time the sun rose over our pristine white box sanctuary this morning, he woke up stretching with the arrogant satisfaction of a man who believes he has finally broken a wild horse into a show pony, completely unaware that the woman silently flipping pancakes in the kitchen was no longer his wife, but his executioner. I moved through the kitchen with the mechanical grace of a wind-up doll pouring the batter onto the griddle to create perfectly golden circles, while the throbbing ache in my jaw served as a metronome for the hatred building inside my chest. He walked in smelling of sandalwood and expensive self-righteousness and froze when he saw the table set not for two, but for four, just as the doorbell echoed through the silent house like a judge's gavel. In that split second, as his eyes darted from the extra plates to the front door, he realized that my silence wasn't submission. It was the quiet accumulation of evidence for a trial he didn't even know was beginning. You know, that specific kind of silence that exists in a house that costs $2 million, the kind that feels less like peace and more like the pressurized air inside a submarine deep underwater. It is a silence that screams a heavy blanket that smothers you while you are wide awake. And here, in this architectural marvel of glass and white marble silence, is the only thing we are allowed to consume in abundance. Imagine a life where every surface is so polished you can see your own distorted reflection staring back at you, judging you where the only acceptable emotion is a curated filter-ready joy that matches the minimalist decor. I stand here at the granite island, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and it looks like a scene from a lifestyle magazine, the kind David sells to his 5 million followers. But if you look closer past the vase of fresh white lilies and the expensive espresso machine, you would see the slight tremor in my hand as I hold the spatula, a vibration of pure, unadulterated terror mixed with a newfound cold resolve. I am the woman who has sacrificed her voice, her sorrow, and her very identity to build the pedestal for the joy architect. And today, I am going to use these very hands, the ones that have smoothed his shirts and hidden his secrets, to dismantle it all brick by perfect brick. The smell of buttermilk and vanilla usually signifies comfort, a Sunday tradition that families across America cherish. But in this house, the sweet aroma is nothing more than a cloying perfume used to mask the stench of decay. As I flip the third pancake, watching the batter bubble and firm up, I can feel the phantom weight of the plastic device still stretching the corners of my mouth, a ghost sensation that makes my jaw click audibly every time I swallow. David calls it behavioral correction, a tool to retrain the facial muscles for optimal approachability, but I know it for what it is: a muzzle designed to keep the ugly, messy reality of human grief from staining his pristine white carpet. Last night, when the news of my mother's passing came through the phone, shattering my world, he didn't hold me. He didn't offer a shoulder or a tissue. Instead, he looked at my tears with the same disdain one might have for a red wine stain on a silk blouse, a nuisance to be treated immediately before it sets. He told me that negativity is a virus, that my sobbing was a vibration of failure, that he couldn't afford to be around before his big livestream anniversary. So he fixed me. He fixed me until my gums bled and my spirit calcified into something sharp and dangerous, something that is currently slicing through the illusion of our marriage as I plate the food with surgical precision. David enters the kitchen exactly at 7:00 a.m., his internal clock synchronized with his public persona of high-functioning success, wearing his signature Choose Joy t-shirt and sweatpants that cost more than my first car. He looks radiant, his skin glowing from his 12-step skincare routine, his eyes bright with the narcissism that the world mistakes for charisma. He stops by the island, leaning in to inspect the breakfast spread. his eyes scanning the pancakes for imperfections, for burnt edges or irregular shapes, because in David's world, even a carbohydrate must adhere to the laws of excellence. Smells like gratitude in here, he says, his voice, that smooth baritone instrument that has hypnotized stadiums full of desperate people. He walks behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders, and I force every muscle in my body to remain fluid, to not turn into the stone that I feel like inside. He squeezes a possessive gesture that mimics affection but feels like ownership and whispers into my ear. I knew you'd feel better after a good night's rest, Sarah. The device works, doesn't it? You look lighter, less burdened by that heavy dark energy you were carrying yesterday. He actually believes it. He believes that a piece of plastic and 12 hours of isolation have cured me of the loss of the woman who gave me life. I turn to face him, employing the skills he taught me, lifting the corners of my mouth into a smile that doesn't reach my eyes, a smile that hurts physically as the bruised tissue protests against the movement. I feel like a new person, David. I lie, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. You were right. I needed to focus on the positive. Mom would want me to be happy, right? He beams, validating his own genius, and reaches out to stroke my cheek, his thumb brushing over the layer of heavy concealer I applied 30 minutes ago. Underneath that beige cream is a purple-yellow bruise, the size of a thumbprint where the strap dug into my skin, a physical receipt of his love. I hold my breath, praying the makeup holds, praying he doesn't rub too hard and reveal the ugliness he tried so hard to erase. This is the dance we do, a waltz on a minefield. He withdraws his hand, satisfied with his inspection, and moves to the refrigerator to grab his alkaline water. We have a big night tonight, Sarah. The 1 million milestone livestream. I need you to be this version of yourself. The glowing, supportive wife. No tears, no drama. Just pure, unadulterated light. Can you handle that? The audacity of his question hangs in the air, a challenge that assumes I am still the fragile creature he molded. I have handled everything you've ever asked of me, haven't I? I reply, turning back to the stove to turn off the burner, using the noise of the gas cutting out to hide the tremor in my voice. My mind flashes back to the trash can in the master bathroom, where I found my mother's locket this morning. It was a cheap silver thing, tarnished and old, holding a tiny pixelated photo of her laughing. David had ripped it from my neck during the correction, calling it an anchor to the past, a totem of lower vibrations. He threw it away like a used tissue. I fished it out, cleaned it with my toothbrush, and it is now pinned securely inside my bra, resting against my heart, cold and hard. It is my fuel. It is the evidence of his cruelty that he thinks has been disposed of. He sits down at the head of the table, unfolding his napkin, completely ignoring the fact that I haven't sat down yet. He is already checking his phone, scrolling through comments, feeding the beast of his ego. Oh, by the way, he says, without looking up, I saw you set extra plates. Are the cleaning crew coming early? I told you I want the house empty by noon for the tech team setup. Not the cleaning crew, I say softly, walking over to the table with the platter of pancakes, placing it down in the center with a deliberate, heavy thud that makes the silverware rattle. I invited a few people for the live stream. David stops scrolling. His head snaps up, his eyes narrowing in that way that usually precedes a lecture or a punishment. The air in the room drops 10 degrees. You did what, Sarah? We discussed this. The set needs to be controlled. Just you and me. The intimate look into our sanctuary. Who did you invite? He stands up, his height suddenly looming over the table, the benevolent guru vanishing to reveal the controller beneath. This is the moment, the pivot point where I stop being the victim and start being the narrator of his downfall. I look him dead in the eye, my hand unconsciously moving to cover the spot on my chest where the locket is hidden. I invited Martha. I say, naming his publisher, the woman who holds the keys to his career. And Sheriff Miller. He's such a fan, David. I thought, I thought having a pillar of the community and your biggest business partner here would validate the milestone. Show them the real us. Fear. It's a micro expression lasting less than a second, but I see it flash across his face. Fear of the uncontrolled variable. Fear of the unscripted moment. He opens his mouth to berate me, to demand I cancel, to unleash the verbal venom that he keeps reserved for me, but he can't. Not when I've framed it as an act of devotion to his brand. He blinks, processing the trap, trying to find a way to dismantle it without breaking character. That was presumptuous of you, Sarah. He says, his voice tight, the smile gone. Martha is a busy woman. The sheriff is on duty. You shouldn't bother important people. I pour him coffee, the dark liquid swirling in the white cup. Oh, they were delighted to come. In fact, I pause, glancing at the digital clock on the microwave. They wanted to come early to see the preparations, to see the joy architect in his natural habitat before the cameras roll. David looks at his watch, panic beginning to bleed into his features. He looks at his sweatpants, then at the perfect breakfast, then at me. He realizes he has lost control of the schedule, and for a man like David, timing is everything. He doesn't know that the invite wasn't just for a party. It was a summons to a crime scene that hasn't been discovered yet. You should probably go shower, David. I suggest, helpful, my voice dripping with the same saccharine sweetness he forces me to swallow daily. You wouldn't want Martha to see you looking anything less than perfect. She mentions all the time how purity of appearance reflects purity of soul. He glares at me, a look of pure hatred that would wither a lesser woman, but I am already withered. I am dry wood waiting for a spark. He pushes his chair back, the legs screeching against the marble floor, a jagged sound that breaks the stillness. We will talk about boundaries later, he hisses, leaning in close so I can smell the coffee on his breath. If one thing goes wrong tonight, if you shed one single tear, if you embarrass me in front of Martha, you won't need a smile trainer. You'll need a reconstructive surgeon. He turns on his heel and storms out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps retreating up the stairs. I stand alone in the vast white kitchen. I pick up his plate of untouched pancakes and slowly scrape them into the trash bin right on top of the wet coffee grounds. Boundaries, I whisper to the empty room. Yes, David. We are definitely going to talk about boundaries. The echo of David's footsteps faded into the plush carpet of the second floor, but the threat he left behind hung in the kitchen air like the smell of burnt toast, acrid and impossible to ignore. My hands, still hovering over the trash bin where I had discarded the perfect pancakes, began to shake violently, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline that had just coursed through my veins. I gripped the cold marble edge of the island, my knuckles turning white, trying to ground myself in the physical world, trying to stop the room from spinning. It is a strange thing, fear. It doesn't always make you scream. Sometimes it makes you incredibly efficient. I turned to the sink, turned on the faucet, and watched the water swirl down the drain, the sound rushing in to fill the silence. But even the noise of the water couldn't drown out the memory that was clawing at the back of my mind, demanding to be replayed. It wasn't the threat of the surgeon that terrified me most. It was the memory of 12 hours ago. It was the moment the joy architect decided that my grief was a structural flaw in his perfect life that needed to be renovated immediately. I closed my eyes, and suddenly the bright white kitchen dissolved into the shadows of last night. It started with a phone call at 8:14 p.m. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft ambient amber lighting that David insists promotes alpha brainwaves. I was sitting in the lounge, proofreading the manuscript for his upcoming book, The Choice to Shine, when my personal phone buzzed against the glass coffee table. It was a jarring sound, an intrusion. I saw the caller ID, St. Mary's Hospital, and my heart hammered against my ribs with a premonition of disaster. When I answered, the voice on the other end was kind, professional, and devastatingly final. Mrs. Miller, I'm so sorry. It was a massive stroke. It happened very quickly. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds, foreign syllables that couldn't possibly apply to my mother, the woman who had called me just yesterday to tell me about her new rose bushes. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a clatter. A sound ripped out of my throat, not a word, not a cry, but a raw animalistic wail of pure agony. It was a sound that didn't belong in this curated house, a sound of messy, ugly human despair. I collapsed onto the rug, curling into a ball, gasping for air, as if the room had suddenly been depressurized. I wasn't Sarah the wife, or Sarah the assistant. I was just a daughter who had lost her anchor. I expected arms around me. In any normal marriage, in any normal human interaction, the response to that kind of sound is comfort. I expected David to rush in from his office to pull me up to hold me while I shook apart. And he did come in. But he didn't run. He walked. I heard his measured steps approaching the soft thud-thud of his designer slippers. I looked up through a blur of tears, my chest heaving, reaching out a hand towards him, begging silently for connection. David stood over me, silhouetted by the hallway light, looking down, not with sympathy, but with annoyance. He was holding a glass of wine, and he didn't even set it down. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm, dangerously level. "You are vibrating at a chaotic frequency. The neighbors can hear you." He wasn't worried about my mother. He wasn't worried about my pain. He was worried about the acoustics. My mother. I choked out the words, wet and ragged. "She's gone, David. She's dead." I waited for the mask to crack, for the husband to appear. Instead, the life coach sighed, a sound of exasperation, as if I had just told him I'd scratched the car. "I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah," he said robotically. "But death is a transition. It's natural. What isn't natural is this display. Your hysteria is polluting the sanctuary." He knelt down, but not to hug me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, controlling. "Listen to me. We have the 1 million live stream tomorrow. I cannot have you looking like a victim. Swollen eyes, blotchy skin. It betrays the brand. It tells the world that we haven't mastered our emotions." I stared at him, horror slowly mixing with the grief. My mother's body wasn't even cold yet, and he was worried about my complexion for a video. I can't do the live stream," I whispered, pulling away from him. "I need to go to her. I need to handle the arrangements." David's face hardened. The benevolence evaporated, replaced by the cold steel of the narcissist denied. "You aren't going anywhere," he stated, standing up and towering over me. "The roads are wet. You're emotional. You're a liability behind the wheel. And you are certainly not ruining my big night because you can't regulate your feelings. If you can't stop crying, Sarah, I will help you stop." He turned and walked to the wall cabinet where he kept his tools, gadgets he reviewed for sponsors. He came back holding a small white box. I knew what was inside. I had seen him unbox it on Instagram last week. The Smile Trainer. "Please, David," I begged, scrambling backward on the rug until my back hit the sofa. "Just let me grieve. Please." He didn't listen. He never listens. He only broadcasts. He opened the box and took out the device, a curved piece of hard white plastic with resistant springs on the sides designed to stretch the mouth into a wide, forced grin, to train the zygomatic muscles for a more engaging appearance. In a medical setting, it might be a tool. In his hands, under the dim lights of our living room, it looked like an instrument of torture. "Stand up," he commanded. When I didn't move, paralyzed by a cocktail of shock and sorrow, he grabbed my arm and hauled me up. He wasn't gentle. He pushed me down into the armchair. "Open your mouth." I clamped my lips shut, shaking my head, tears streaming down my face, salting my lips. "Don't make this ugly, Sarah. It's for your own good. You need to reset your facial neutrality." He pinned me against the chair with his body weight, his thumb digging into my jawline, forcing my mouth open. I tried to scream, but he was too fast. He shoved the plastic flanges between my lips and cheeks, the springs snapping into place, stretching my mouth wide open, locking my jaw into a grotesque, permanent rictus of a smile. The pain was immediate and sharp. The plastic dug into my gums, pushing them back against my teeth. The corners of my mouth were stretched to their absolute limit, the skin feeling like it was about to tear. I tried to reach up to pull it out, but David caught my wrists. He used a zip tie from his pocket, why did he have that? And bound my hands loosely to the armrests of the chair. There, he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. He looked at me, a woman bound grieving with a plastic device forcing her face into a mockery of happiness, and he nodded. Now you look approachable. Now you look like a winner. The horror of it was absolute. I couldn't close my mouth. I couldn't swallow properly. I started to cry harder, panic setting in, but the device wouldn't let me sob. The sounds coming out of my throat were strangled, gurgling noises. Drool mixed with tears ran down my chin, unchecked. I felt like an animal in a lab, a specimen being prepped for display. I'm going to leave you here for the night, David said casually, picking up his wine glass again. Think of it as immersion therapy. By morning, your muscles will remember the shape of joy, and hopefully, your mind will have caught up. He walked to the wall switch. Good night, Sarah. Focus on gratitude. He flicked the switch, and the room plunged into darkness. I heard the door click shut, and then the lock turn. I was alone. The silence returned, but this time it was terrifying. I sat there in the dark, my mother's death fresh in my heart, my mouth forced open in a silent scream. The physical pain was excruciating, the cramps in my jaw, the dryness of my throat, the way the plastic cut into the soft tissue of my cheeks. But the psychological agony was worse. I thought of my mother. I thought of how she used to brush my hair when I was little. I wanted to call out to her to say, "Mom," but I couldn't form the word. The device turned every syllable into a vowel. Mom became, ah. Help became, ha. I was trapped in a body that was no longer mine, in a house that was a prison disguised as a palace. Every time a fresh wave of grief hit me, my body tried to contort into a frown or a sob, but the plastic springs fought back, forcing the smile wider. It was a war being fought on my face. Hours passed. I don't know how many. The shadows moved across the room as the moon rose and fell. My tears eventually ran dry, not because the sadness was gone, but because I was dehydrated. My jaw went numb, then throbbed with a fiery, white-hot pain that radiated into my ears and neck. In that darkness, something inside me broke. But it wasn't the break David wanted. He wanted to break my will, to shatter my negativity so he could rebuild me as a perfect reflection of himself. Instead, the part of me that was the good wife, the supportive partner, the woman who believed in his potential, that part died. It died right there in that armchair, suffocated by plastic and cruelty. And in the cold, hollow space where my love for him used to be, something else began to grow, a cold, hard clarity. I realized that my mother's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a revelation. She was the only person who loved me unconditionally. With her gone, I had no one to protect me but myself. I stopped struggling against the straps. I stopped trying to spit out the device. I sat in the dark, staring into the abyss, and I let the hate fill me up. I let it calcify my bones. The sound of the water overflowing in the sink snapped me back to the present. I gasped, turning the faucet off with a jerk of my hand. The kitchen was bright and white again. The nightmare of last night was over, but the evidence was etched into my skin. I raised a trembling hand to my face, tracing the sore spots near my ears where the jaw muscles were still spasming. I touched the raw skin inside my lip, where the plastic had rubbed it raw. The pain was real. The cruelty was real. I looked down at the sink, seeing my reflection in the window glass. The makeup covered the bruises, but it couldn't cover the look in my eyes. They looked older, deadlier. David thought he had trained me to smile. He was wrong. He had trained me to bite. I dried my hands on a dish towel, the fabric rough against my skin. I could hear the floorboards creaking upstairs, David pacing, getting ready. He was probably rehearsing his opening lines, practicing his empathy face in the mirror. He had no idea that the script had already been rewritten. I reached into my bra and touched the locket again, the cold metal biting into my skin like a promise. "I'm ready, Mom," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "Let's go to a party." I retreated to the downstairs guest bathroom, locking the door behind me with a click that sounded too loud in the silent house. This room was a sterile cube of white marble and chrome, designed to impress visitors with its emptiness, but right now it was my triage station. I turned on the vanity lights, harsh, unforgiving LEDs that David installed, because truth requires illumination, and finally dared to look at the woman in the mirror. What stared back was not a face, but a crime scene. The smile trainer had done its work with brutal efficiency. The corners of my mouth were raw and inflamed, the skin stretched to the point of micro-tearing, blooming with angry red welts that looked like cold sores gone wrong. But the worst damage was deep in the tissue. Faint yellowish purple bruises were beginning to surface along my jawline and cheeks, where the plastic flanges had dug in for 12 agonizing hours. My lips were swollen, cracked, and dry, a grotesque caricature of a collagen injection gone wrong. I looked like a clown who had been beaten backstage. I touched the skin, gingerly wincing as a sharp bolt of pain shot up to my ear. This was the face of David's love. This was the price of his joy. I opened the cabinet under the sink, pushing aside the expensive, unused guest soaps to find my emergency kit. David didn't know this kit existed. He believed in natural beauty, enhanced only by the skincare line he was paid to promote, but I knew better. I knew that survival in this house often required a mask. I pulled out the heavy-duty color-correcting palette, the kind used by stage actors and burn victims. I didn't apply it with vanity. I applied it with the cold precision of a soldier putting on camouflage. First, the green primer to neutralize the angry redness around my lips. Then the peach corrector to cancel out the purple bruising on my jaw. I worked in silence, the only sound the soft tap-tap-tap of the makeup sponge against my battered skin. Each touch was a sting, a reminder of the night before, but I welcomed the pain. It kept me focused. It kept the rage simmering right below the surface, hot and ready. I layered the full coverage foundation on top, a shade called porcelain that matched the walls of this prison. I blended it into my neck, erasing the evidence, smoothing over the cracks. Slowly, the victim disappeared. The bruises vanished under a layer of beige silence. In her place, Sarah, the supportive wife, began to emerge, a woman with flawless skin and dead eyes. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop, vibrating on top of a folded hand towel where I had hidden it. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the screen, shielding it with my body in case David decided to barge in. It was a text message. Not from a friend, not from a relative, but from Sheriff Miller. "Sarah, just confirming for tonight. Mrs. Martha reached out to me, said she's driving separately, but will arrive around 6:45 p.m. Looking forward to celebrating David. He's done so much for this town." A cold, grim smile tried to form on my lips, but I suppressed it to save the makeup. The sheriff had taken the bait. He thought he was coming to a coronation. He didn't know he was coming to an execution. I typed back quickly, my fingers flying. "Perfect. Please come to the side entrance so you don't disrupt the tech setup. We want it to be a surprise for the viewers, too." I hit send and immediately deleted the thread. The trap was set. The side entrance led directly into the living room, out of the camera's blind spot, but within earshot. They would hear everything before they saw anything. I finished the transformation with a dusting of setting powder, locking the lie in place. I applied a moisturizing lipstick, a soft pink that David preferred, wincing as the applicator dragged across my split lip. I stepped back to evaluate the work. From 3 feet away, I looked perfect, radiant even. But if you stepped closer, if you looked into the pupils, you could see the hollowness. It was a masterpiece of deception. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway, moving towards the living room, which served as David's studio of light. The space was cavernous, dominated by a white leather sectional and a wall of windows that looked out onto the manicured lawn. The tech crew, which was just David's setup as he didn't trust outsiders with his equipment, was already in place. 3 tripods, 3 4K cameras, a massive ring light that looked like a portal to another dimension, and the laptop, the nerve center of the operation, sitting on a clear acrylic podium. David was already there, obsessively adjusting the lighting, moving a vase of white hydrangeas 2 inches to the left, then 1 inch to the right. He didn't turn around when I entered. "The lighting is tricky today," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "The cloud cover is diffusing the natural light. I need to boost the ISO." He was wearing his on-air suit now, a bespoke cream-colored linen number that made him look like a modern-day prophet. "How do I look?" I asked, my voice steady, projecting the calmness he demanded. He turned then, his eyes scanning me like a barcode reader. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at my mouth. He scrutinized the jawline, searching for the bruises he knew he had put there. He leaned in, invading my personal space, his breath smelling of peppermint breath spray. He reached out and tilted my chin up, his thumb brushing dangerously close to the sore spot. I stopped breathing. If he rubbed the makeup off, if he saw the deception, the game was over. "Flawless," he whispered, satisfied that his property had been restored to mint condition. "See, I told you. The body heals when the mind submits to positivity. You look like an angel, Sarah." "I feel like one," I lied, stepping out of his reach before he could touch me again. "I'll go check the audio levels." I moved to the laptop. This was the moment. David was distracted by his reflection in the window, practicing his opening smile. I opened the presentation software. The file named 1,000,000 Journey PPTX was queued up. It contained slides of his book covers, his best quotes, and photos of us looking happy on vacations we never enjoyed. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I had a USB drive hidden in my palm, small and silver, containing a single video file I had extracted from the cloud security backup while he was sleeping this morning. Living room, Harcam. 2000 Ichatars. Yesterday. MP4. With a sleight of hand born of desperation, I plugged the drive into the rear port of the laptop. It mounted silently. I dragged the video file into the presentation playlist, dropping it right at the end after the slide titled "The Truth About Love." I set it to autoplay. It took 3 seconds. "Audio looks good, David," I called out, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Crisp and clear." "Excellent." David clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the empty room. "We go live in 20 minutes. Remember the cues, Sarah. When I talk about support systems, that's your signal to come into the frame. You sit, you smile, you nod. You do not speak unless I ask you a direct question. And if I do ask, keep it brief. Affirmation only. Yes, David. You're right, David. Can you manage that?" He walked over to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, dropping a slice of organic lemon into each. He was treating this like a performance, a scripted reality, where he was the director and God combined. He handed me a glass. "To us," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "To the empire we built." I looked at the lemon floating in the water, acidic and bitter. "To the truth," I corrected softly, taking a sip. The water stung my cut lip, a sharp grounding pain. "What was that?" David asked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "To the truth," I repeated louder this time, forcing my painted mouth into a smile that mirrored his. "The truth of your success." He relaxed, his ego soothed. "That's right. 5 million people, Sarah. 5 million souls looking to me for guidance. We cannot let them down." He checked his watch. 15 minutes. Go sit in the holding chair. Meditate. Center yourself. I need your energy to be pure white light. He turned his back to me to check the camera focus one last time. I walked to the armchair in the corner, not the one from last night. I refused to sit there and sat down. I checked the time. 6:40 p.m. 5 minutes until the guests arrived. 20 minutes until the world was watching. I closed my eyes, but I didn't meditate. I prayed. Not to David's God of success, but to a God of justice. Let them come on time. Let the camera focus. Let him fall. The silence in the room stretched thin, vibrating with the hum of the electronics. I could hear the faint whir of the hard drive fan in the laptop spinning the digital evidence of his cruelty. David began to vocalize, making strange humming noises to warm up his throat. Me, 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 may, 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 may. He chanted, pacing back and forth. It was absurd. It was terrifying. He was a monster in a linen suit preparing to preach about love. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the phone one last time, ensuring the volume was up. If things went wrong, if the sheriff didn't show, I had 911 on speed dial. But I didn't want the police to just arrest him. I wanted the world to see him. I wanted the 5 million people he saved to see the man who destroyed his wife. Suddenly, a soft ding came from the front gate intercom panel on the wall. David froze mid-vocal exercise. He whipped around, glaring at the panel. "Who is that?" he hissed. "I told you no deliveries. It ruins the feng shui." He looked at me, accusation in his eyes. "Did you order something?" I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my white dress, my hands steady now that the moment had arrived. "I don't know," I said, my voice, the picture of innocence. "Maybe it's a fan or a neighbor." The intercom dinged again. David groaned, a sound of pure frustration. "Ignore it. They'll go away." But then the distinct sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway, followed by another. Footsteps on the gravel. "They're coming to the door, David," I said. "You have to answer. It might be important. You're the man of the house." He cursed under his breath, a word he never used in public, and marched towards the hallway. "If this is an Amazon driver, I'm going to sue the company." He disappeared into the foyer. I stayed in the living room listening. I heard the heavy front door open, then a pause, then the sheriff's booming, jovial voice. "David, my man, surprise." I watched from the archway of the living room, standing just inside the shadow of a tall potted ficus, witnessing a masterclass in deception. From the foyer, I could see David's back stiffen, the muscles in his neck locking up as if he had been tased. For a normal man, the sudden appearance of the sheriff and his most important business partner 5 minutes before the biggest moment of his career would be a catastrophe. But David wasn't a normal man. He was a chameleon. I saw the exact second the Joy architect rebooted his system. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched, and he pivoted on his heel to face them, his face transforming from a mask of murderous rage to one of ecstatic welcome. "Sheriff Martha." His voice boomed rich and warm, echoing off the high ceilings. What an incredible surprise. I was just centering myself for the broadcast, but seeing you two, well, that's better than any meditation. He moved forward to shake Sheriff Miller's hand, clapping him on the shoulder with a bonhomie that made my stomach turn. Sheriff Miller, a man built like a refrigerator with a mustache to match, beamed back, completely oblivious to the fact that he was shaking hands with a domestic terrorist. "Hope we aren't intruding, Dave," Miller said, his voice booming. "Your lovely wife insisted. Said you couldn't possibly celebrate 1 million followers without your real-world support system." David's smile didn't waver, but I saw his eyes dart past the sheriff's shoulder, scanning the room for me. They were cold, dead sharks swimming in a sea of blue. "Sarah is so thoughtful," David said, the words sliding out like oil. "She knows how much I value community. Come in, come in. Don't stand in the entryway." Martha stepped forward, then sharp and elegant in a charcoal suit, holding a bottle of vintage champagne. "We won't stay long, David. We just wanted to toast the milestone. Sarah mentioned you were nervous. I told her, David doesn't get nervous, he gets focused." I stepped out from the shadows, then floating into the light like the dutiful ghost I was pretending to be. My hands were clasped in front of my white dress to hide their trembling. "There you are," I said, my voice soft, breathless. "I'm so glad you made it in time." David turned to look at me. To the guests, it looked like a look of adoration. To me, it was a promise of violence. "Darling," he said, reaching out to take my hand. He squeezed it hard, his ring digging into my knuckles. "You truly outdid yourself. Why didn't you tell me? I would have prepared a proper spread." He pulled me close for a side hug, his lips brushing my ear. "You are dead," he whispered so low that only I could hear it, the sound hidden by the sheriff's laughter. "Smile," he commanded, pulling back and grinning at his guests. I smiled. It hurt. The makeup cracked imperceptibly at the corners of my mouth, but the smile trainer had done its job well. My muscles knew exactly how to fake joy even when I was screaming inside. "Where should we sit?" Martha asked, looking around the living room, which had been transformed into a high-tech studio. "We don't want to ruin the shot." This was the critical moment. David opened his mouth undoubtedly to suggest they sit in the kitchen or the dining room, far away from the cameras and microphones. "Actually," I interjected, cutting him off with a sweetness that felt like poison, "I set up the VIP chairs right over there." I pointed to the two velvet armchairs I had positioned just to the left of the camera tripod. They were out of the direct frame but clearly visible in the peripheral reflection of the glass patio doors behind David. More importantly, they were close enough to hear every breath, every whisper, every lie. David says the energy of a live audience makes him perform better. Right, honey. I looked at him, daring him to contradict his own philosophy of connection. David looked at the chairs, then at the camera, then at me. He was cornered. If he sent them away, he looked rude and secretive. If he let them stay, he lost total control of the environment. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Absolutely," he managed to say. "Please sit. Be my energy anchors." The sheriff and Martha settled into the chairs, looking thrilled to be part of the behind-the-scenes magic. I walked over to the laptop podium, checking the time. 2 minutes to air, David," I announced professionally. Microphone check. David walked to the center of the rug, adjusting his lapel mic. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. I watched him shed the skin of the angry husband and fully inhabit the persona of the guru. It was terrifying to watch. It was like watching a demon put on a human suit. He opened his eyes and they were clear, compassionate, and utterly vacant of truth. "Testing 1, 2. David said, his voice dropping an octave into his signature, soothing register. "Love is a choice. Pain is a signal." "Testing." He looked at me. "Audio." "Perfect." I said, my finger hovering over the Go Live button. The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed. The sheriff leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching with reverence. Martha crossed her legs, notebook ready. They were the jury, though they didn't know it yet. And I was the prosecutor standing at the controls. David smoothed his hair. He looked at the camera lens as if it were a lover. "Let's do this," he whispered. "For the million." He nodded at me. I clicked the button. The on-air light on the camera turned a menacing red. The monitor showed the stream connecting. The viewer count started skyrocketing instantly. $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. "Hello, world!" David began, opening his arms wide as if to embrace the internet. "I'm David Miller, and welcome to our sanctuary." He paused for effect, exactly 3 seconds, just as he practiced. 1 million. That's not just a number. That is 1 million hearts beating in unison, choosing to reject the darkness and embrace the light. I stood behind the laptop, watching the comments flood the screen. "We love you, David. You saved my marriage. You are a saint." It was nauseating. He was feeding them empty calories and they were starving for it. "Tonight is special." David continued, pacing slowly in the small circle of light. "Tonight we aren't just talking about theory. We are talking about reality. We are talking about the hard work of happiness." He chuckled, a self-deprecating sound. "And believe me, it is work. Even for me." He glanced at the sheriff and Martha, acknowledging them with a nod, then looked back at the lens. "I have my struggles. I have my days where the shadow tries to creep in. But do you know what I do? I look at my life. I look at my home. He gestured around the white room. I look at the purity of my environment. Then he did something I hadn't scripted, something that made my blood run cold. He turned and extended a hand towards me. And I look at my wife. Sarah, come here. My heart stopped. This wasn't in the plan. I was supposed to stay behind the laptop until the Q&A section. He was improvising. He was pulling me into the light to use me as a prop to show the world his obedient creation. Panic flared in my chest. If I went into that bright ring light, would the makeup hold? Would the HD camera pick up the texture of the concealer over the bruises? I hesitated. Come on. David urged, his smile tightening just a fraction. Don't be shy. The world wants to see the woman behind the architect. Sheriff Miller clapped silently, encouraging me. I had no choice. If I refused, it would look suspicious. I took a breath, summoning the spirit of every actress who ever lived, and walked into the frame. The heat of the ring light hit me like a physical blow. It was blinding. I stood next to David, and he immediately wrapped an arm around my waist. His hand rested on my hip, his fingers digging in painfully, a silent warning to behave. This is Sarah, David said to the camera, pulling me closer so our cheeks touched. I winced internally as his skin brushed against the sore spot on my jaw. She is my rock, my serenity. He looked at me, his eyes glistening with fake emotion. Sarah lost her mother yesterday, he announced. I froze. The sheriff gasped audibly. Martha put a hand to her mouth. I stared at David, stunned. He was using my mother's death. He was using my fresh, raw grief as content. Yes, David continued, his voice dripping with performative sympathy. It was a tragic loss. And yet, look at her. He gestured to my face, my painted, masked, painful face. She is standing here. She is smiling. She is choosing to support our mission despite her pain. He squeezed me harder. Tell them, Sarah. Tell them how you chose joy today. The microphone was thrust in my face. I looked into the black void of the camera lens. I could feel the sheriff's eyes on my back, full of pity. I could feel David's hand bruising my hip. I could feel the locket burning against my skin. He wanted me to validate him. He wanted me to say that his teachings had saved me from grief. Rage, hot and molten, flooded my veins, burning away the fear. He had crossed the final line. He had desecrated my mourning for likes. I looked at him, then back at the camera. I realized I didn't need to wait for the slide. I could start the trial right now. I didn't choose joy, David. I said, my voice trembling, not with sadness, but with the effort of holding back the explosion. The audio was crystal clear. The room went dead silent. David's smile faltered. I chose survival. I saw confusion flicker in his eyes. He tried to pull the mic away, laughing nervously. She's a bit overwhelmed, folks. Grief does strange things. Let her speak, David. Sheriff Miller's voice rang out from the darkness. It wasn't a request. It was a command. David froze. The unexpected interruption from the law shattered his flow. He couldn't silence me now, not with the sheriff watching. He had to play the supportive husband. Of course, David said, his jaw tight. Share your heart, darling. I looked straight into the camera. David says that unhappiness is a failure of will. He says that if you don't smile, you are polluting the world. I reached up and touched my cheek. But sometimes a smile isn't a choice. Sometimes it's a requirement. I turned to the laptop. David prepared a presentation for you all. He wanted to show you the truth about love. I stepped away from him, moving towards the computer. And I think you should see it. David's eyes widened. He sensed the shift. He knew something was wrong. Sarah, we haven't done the intro yet, he said, moving to intercept me. Let's stick to the script. The script is boring, David, I said, my hand landing on the spacebar. Let's show them the reality. I pressed the key. On the massive 65-inch monitor behind us, the slide didn't change to a book cover. Instead, the screen went black for a second, then flickered to life, with the grainy, high-contrast footage of a night vision security camera. The timestamp read, yesterday, 21:45. The room was filled with the sound of my own sobbing from the speakers, raw, guttural, animalistic. And then David's voice, cold and sharp. Open your mouth. Don't make this ugly. David spun around to look at the screen. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like his soul had left his body. He lunged for the laptop. Technical difficulties? He screamed, his voice cracking. Cut the feed! Cut the feed! But he was too late. I had stepped between him and the computer, and from the VIP seats, I heard the sound of a champagne glass shattering on the floor. The sound of the champagne glass shattering was the only physical noise in the room, but the psychological explosion was deafening. David lunged toward the laptop podium, his movements jerky and desperate, his face a contorted mask of pure panic that no amount of media training could hide. Technical difficulties? He shrieked again, his voice cracking into a falsetto that betrayed his terror. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the end stream button, the only thing that could save his carefully constructed reality from incinerating. But I didn't move. I planted my feet firmly on the plush white rug, turning my body into a human shield between the monster and his kill switch. For 10 years, I had made myself small to fit into the corners of his life, but in this moment I felt immovable, rooted by the weight of my own trauma. Me, move, Sarah! David roared, reaching over my shoulder, his fingernails scratching my arm as he clawed for the trackpad. You stupid woman, you're ruining everything, move! He shoved me hard, sending me stumbling back against the acrylic podium. The laptop wobbled, threatening to fall, but the connection held. The green light of the camera remained steady, an unblinking eye, broadcasting his violence to the world. Behind us, on the massive 65-inch screen that dominated the wall, the video continued to play, relentless and horrifyingly clear. The grainy night vision footage showed a different David, not the man in the linen suit, but a predator in shadows. The audio filled the room, echoing off the minimalist walls. Don't make this ugly, Sarah. It's for your own good. The digital, David hissed from the speakers. On screen, the viewers watched as he pinned my arms to the chair. They saw the glint of the white plastic device. They saw him force my jaw open, the sickening snap of the springs engaging, stretching my mouth into that grotesque permanent grin. They heard the muffled gurgling cry that escaped my throat, a sound of pure helplessness. In the room, the real David froze, as his own voice echoed back at him. He stared at the screen, watching himself commit the crime he thought he had buried in the dark. For a split second, he looked confused, as if he couldn't reconcile the hero he believed he was with the villain on the screen. Then the confusion hardened into a terrified rage. He realized the narrative had been stolen. Turn it off, David screamed, abandoning the laptop and turning on me. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into the flesh with bruising force, shaking me so hard my teeth rattled. Tell them it's a deepfake. Tell them you edited it. Fix this, Sarah. Fix it now. His spit flew onto my face, hot and angry. I looked up at him, limp in his grasp, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a struggle. I let him shake me. I let him show the sheriff and the world exactly who he was when the cameras were off. I can't fix the truth, David, I whispered, my voice calm amidst his storm. You wanted to show them the work of happiness. This is the work. I gestured with my eyes toward the screen where the video showed him tightening the zip ties around my wrists. The juxtaposition was brutal, the live David shaking his wife while the recorded David tortured her. It was a stereo surround sound of abuse. That's enough. The command boomed from the back of the room, cutting through David's hysteria like a gunshot. Sheriff Miller was on his feet. The jovial fanboy demeanor had evaporated, replaced by the steel-spined posture of a lawman who had seen too much evil to be fooled by a nice suit. He stepped over the puddle of spilled champagne, his hand instinctively resting on his belt near his sidearm, though he wasn't drawing it yet. "Step away from her, David. Now." The sheriff's voice was low, dangerous, leaving no room for negotiation. Martha sat frozen in her chair, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, as she looked from the screen to the man she had called a visionary. She was trembling, the realization crashing down on her that she had published a monster. David whipped his head around to face the sheriff, his eyes wide and manic. He released me, holding his hands up in a gesture that was half surrender, half manipulation. "Sheriff, wait. You don't understand." David pleaded, his voice shifting instantly into his reasonable guy tone, though his chest was heaving. This, this is a misunderstanding. It's role play. Yes, that's it. It's a therapy exercise we do. Intense emotional release. Sarah consented to this. She asked for it. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's unstable, Sheriff. Her mother died yesterday. She's having a psychotic break and trying to punish me because she's grieving. Look at her. Does she look hurt? She looks fine." He was gaslighting in real time, spinning a web of lies so fast it was dizzying. He turned to the camera, realizing it was still rolling. "Folks, please bear with us," he shouted at the lens, flashing a terrified, crooked smile. "My wife is experiencing a mental health crisis. We are handling it with love. But the internet is a savage judge, and it does not forgive." I glanced at the laptop screen. The chat stream, which had been a river of hearts and praise just minutes ago, had turned into a tsunami of horror. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur, but key phrases jumped out. "OMG, he is hurting her. Is that a torture device? Someone call 911, look at her face. He's a psychopath." The hashtag #60SaveSarah was already trending. The viewer count hadn't dropped. It had doubled. 7 million people were now watching the Joy Architect self-destruct. David saw it too. He saw the wall of text turning against him. He saw his empire, his book deals, his speaking fees, his adoration all dissolving into pixels of hatred. The realization broke him. The narcissist cannot survive without the reflection, and the mirror had just shattered. "You bitch!" David hissed, abandoning the act completely. The facade of the loving husband fell away, revealing the snarling animal beneath. He lunged at me again, his hand raised to strike, forgetting the sheriff, forgetting the camera, driven only by the primal need to silence the source of his humiliation. "I gave you everything I made you." But before his hand could connect, a heavy hand clamped onto his wrist. Sheriff Miller didn't just step in. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had taken down drunk drivers and bar brawlers twice David's size. He twisted David's arm behind his back, in one fluid motion, slamming him face first into the white wall next to the bookshelf. Thud. A vase of white lilies toppled over, crashing to the floor and spilling water everywhere, a chaotic mess in the pristine sanctuary. "David Miller, you are under arrest for domestic battery and unlawful restraint." The sheriff recited, his knee pressing into the back of David's expensive linen trousers. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it because you're live streaming your own confession." David struggled, kicking out, his face pressed against the drywall. "Get off me! Do you know who I am? I pay your salary, Martha. Do something, tell him." He screamed for his publisher, but Martha was already standing up, backing away, as if he were radioactive. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Sarah, I swear to God I didn't know." I didn't answer her. I didn't look at David struggling against the sheriff. I looked at the camera. The red light was still on. 7 million witnesses were waiting for the final piece of evidence. David had claimed I looked fine. He had claimed I was unhurt. It was time to answer that lie. I walked slowly toward the lens, moving into the center of the frame until my face filled the shot. The room behind me was chaos. The sheriff cuffing David, screaming obscenities, the video loop finally ending on a freeze frame of me bound in the dark, but I was the eye of the storm. I reached for the glass of lemon water that sat on the podium, the same water David had toasted to truth with earlier. I dipped the hem of my white sleeve into the water. With a slow, deliberate motion, I brought the wet fabric to my face. I didn't scrub, I didn't rush, I wiped. One long, firm stroke across my left cheek. The beige porcelain foundation smeared and lifted, dissolving onto the white cloth. Underneath, the angry purple-black bruise bloomed like a dark flower. I wiped again across my chin. The raw red abrasions from the plastic chin rest appeared. I wiped my mouth, removing the soft pink lipstick to reveal the split, swollen lip and the dried blood in the corner. I continued until the mask was gone. I dropped the stained cloth to the floor. I stood there raw and ruined, the map of his cruelty etched into my skin for the world to see. I looked directly into the lens, my eyes dry and hard. I didn't need to say a word. The silence in the room was absolute. Even David had stopped screaming, twisting his head to look at the monitor, seeing the wreckage of his wife's face projected in high definition. He went limp in the sheriff's grip. He knew it was over. There was no spin, no PR strategy, no reframing that could fix this. This is the truth about love, David. I said, my voice magnified by the lapel mic carrying to every smartphone and laptop screen watching. Love doesn't ask you to smile when you're bleeding. Love doesn't lock you in the dark. I reached out and pressed the end stream button. The screen went black. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, pressurized silence of the submarine anymore. It was the empty, echoing silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired. I was shaking now, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a cold exhaustion. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, but they were free. Sheriff Miller hauled David up, spinning him around. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp mechanical sound of finality. David looked at me, his eyes hollow, stripped of all arrogance. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice broken, "what will you do without me?" I looked at him, really, looked at him, and realized the man I had feared for so long was just a construct of smoke and mirrors. "I don't know," I answered honestly, touching the locket beneath my dress. "But I'm going to find out." Sheriff Miller began to march him toward the door. "Let's go, Dave. You've got a new audience waiting downtown." As they passed Martha, she recoiled, clutching her purse. I stood alone in the center of the ruined room, the white lilies crushed underfoot, the makeup wipes stained with the evidence of my liberation. The air conditioner hummed. I took a deep breath. It hurt my ribs, it hurt my jaw, but for the first time in years, the air tasted clean. The metallic click of the handcuffs had been the loudest sound in the world just moments ago, but now it was drowned out by the pathetic, desperate rambling of a man watching his kingdom burn. Sheriff Miller didn't handle David with the reverence usually reserved for the town's most famous resident. He handled him like exactly what he was, a perp. He gripped David's bicep with a hand that looked like a bear trap, propelling him towards the front door of the sanctuary he had built to worship himself. David was stumbling, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the wet floor where the lilies had spilled, losing traction, just as he had lost his grip on reality. He wasn't looking at the sheriff, though. He was craning his neck back, twisting his torso against the restraint to look at me, his eyes wide, frantic, and filled with a terrifying mixture of rage and calculation. He wasn't seeing his wife. He was seeing a breach of contract, a PR crisis, a malfunctioning asset that needed to be recalled. "Sarah, Sarah, listen to me," he shouted, his voice cracking, stripping away the smooth baritone that had seduced millions. "Don't let him take me. Think about the brand. Think about the contracts. We can spin this. We can say it was a reenactment. Sarah." I stood rooted in the center of the living room, the wet makeup wipe still clenched in my hand like a weapon. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. It was fascinating in a morbid, detached way to see the joy architect reduced to this a bargaining, sweating, terrified man trying to negotiate with gravity while he was already falling off the cliff. Sheriff Miller didn't even pause. "Save it for the judge, Dave," he grunted, pushing David through the foyer. The front door stood open, revealing the twilight outside, and for the first time, the flashing red and blue lights of the patrol car invaded the pristine white interior of our home. The colors splashed against the walls, violent and chaotic, staining the purity that David had obsessed over. It looked like a crime scene now. It looked like truth. As they reached the threshold, David dug his heels into the doormat, resisting one last time. He stopped pleading. The desperation vanished, replaced by a cold, venomous sneer that I knew better than anyone. He locked eyes with me, ignoring the neighbors who had begun to gather on the sidewalk, ignoring the sheriff, ignoring everything but the need to twist the knife one last time. "You think you've won?" He hissed, his voice dropping low, carrying across the empty distance between us. "You're nothing without me, Sarah. You're a broken, depressed woman with no money and no name. I made you. I gave you a life people kill for. Without me, you're just a ghost in a big empty house." He leaned forward, straining against the cuffs. "You'll come crawling back. You always do. Because you don't know how to exist without my light." Sheriff Miller had heard enough. He shoved David forward, breaking his stance. "That's enough mouth from you," the sheriff growled, forcing David's head down as they moved toward the cruiser. I watched as he was stuffed into the back seat, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I watched the silhouette of his head through the reinforced glass, still shouting, still moving his mouth but soundless now. A fish in a bowl. A monster in a cage. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a heavy, crushing exhaustion, as if I had just run a marathon while holding my breath. "I didn't know." The voice came from behind me, small and trembling. I turned slowly. I had almost forgotten Martha was there. The powerful publisher, the woman who could make or break careers with a phone call, was standing near the overturned vase, clutching her Chanel bag to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, her immaculate blowout wilted by the humidity of the moment. She looked at my bruised face, then quickly looked away, unable to hold the gaze of the victim she had profited from. "Sarah, I swear to God," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. I thought you were happy. He always said you were just private, fragile." She took a hesitant step toward me, reaching out a hand as if to offer comfort. "If I had known, if you had just told me." I took a step back, rejecting her touch. The movement was sharp, instinctive. I didn't want her pity. Pity was cheap. Pity was what people gave you so they didn't have to give you justice. "You knew, Martha," I said, my voice raspy but steady. "You just didn't want to see." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "That's not fair," she whispered. "I'm a victim of his lies, too." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that hurt my split lip. "No, Martha. You were his megaphone. You read the drafts. You saw how he wrote about control and called it discipline. You saw how I disappeared from the social events, how I got quieter and smaller every year." I pointed to the white walls, to the stack of The Choice to Shine books on the coffee table. "You saw a woman fading away and you called it supportive. You saw a husband who answered every question for his wife and you called it protective. You didn't ask questions because the books were selling. The lie was profitable." Martha opened her mouth to argue but closed it. She looked around the room at the chaos, at the evidence of violence that had shattered the aesthetic she helped market. The shame hit her then. Genuine, ugly shame. She realized that every check she had cashed was signed with my silence. She started, then stopped. She reached into her purse and pulled out her car keys, her hands shaking. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll make sure the publishing house cooperates with the investigation. We'll pull his books. Tonight." It was damage control, of course. It was corporate survival. But it was also the end of David's income. Do what you have to do, I said, turning my back on her. Just close the door when you leave. I heard her heels clicking rapidly on the marble, a staccato retreat. Then the heavy front door closed. The latch clicked. The silence rushed back in. This silence was different. It wasn't the pressurized underwater silence of David's rule. It was the silence of a ruin. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the armies have marched away, leaving only the craters and the smoke. I was alone, truly alone. The house, which usually hummed with the invisible electricity of David's demands, felt dead, vast, cold. I looked down at my dress. The white linen was stained with water and makeup, a beige smear across the chest that looked like dried clay. My face throbbed, a deep rhythmic pulsing in my jaw and cheekbones that synced with my heartbeat. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was coming to collect its due. I walked over to the sofa, not the white leather sectional, I couldn't touch that, but to the window seat. I sat down, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the red taillights of the police cruiser were fading down the long driveway, disappearing into the night. He was gone. The mechanism of my torture had been physically removed, but the ghost remained. I looked around the room. Every object, every surface, every shadow was him. The white rug where he forced me to do yoga until my muscles spasmed. The dining table where he lectured me on the caloric content of a grape. The massive oil painting of him hanging above the fireplace, a portrait commission he had paid $50,000 for, depicting him looking visionary and benevolent, a slight halo effect around his head. His eyes in the painting followed me, judging my posture, judging my grief. "You're nothing without me," he had said. The words echoed in the empty room. It was a terrifying thought. For 10 years, I had been David's wife, David's project, David's shadow. Who was Sarah? I tried to remember the girl I was before him, the girl who liked messy bookstores and drank dark roast coffee and laughed too loud. She felt like a stranger. She felt like a dream I had forgotten. Panic fluttered in my chest. A sudden, irrational fear that he was right, that I would dissolve without his structure. I needed to anchor myself. I needed to prove that I existed. I stood up, my legs shaky but functional. I walked to the center of the room, standing amidst the wreckage of the livestream setup. The ring light was still on, casting a harsh, clinical circle of light on the floor. I reached out and yanked the power cord from the wall. The room plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the ambient streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Better. Realer. I walked to the fireplace. I looked up at the portrait. The joy architect smirked down at me, immortalized in oil and ego. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. That was movie drama, and I was done with drama. I was interested in erasure. I reached up, my fingers gripping the heavy gold frame. It was heavy-weighted with his vanity. I strained my bruised muscles, protesting, a sharp gasp escaping my lips as I lifted it off the hooks. I staggered back under the weight, lowering it to the floor. I didn't smash it. I simply turned it around, leaning the face against the wall. Now it was just a blank canvas, back a rough wooden frame. A nothing. I turned to the bookshelf. His books were displayed face out, row after row of his smiling face. Choose joy. The architecture of happiness. Discipline your soul. I grabbed the first one. Hardcover. Glossy. I opened it to the dedication page. To Sarah, my silence. I ripped the page out. The sound of tearing paper was sharp and satisfying. I crumbled it into a ball and dropped it on the floor. I took the next book. Ripped the cover off. Dropped it. Then the next. I worked methodically, like a machine set to dismantle. I wasn't destroying knowledge. I was weeding a garden. I pulled them down one by one until the shelf was empty, just bare white wood. A pile of glossy debris grew at my feet, a mountain of lies that had made him rich and me hollow. I walked to the kitchen, the scene of the morning's crime. The pancake batter bowl was still in the sink, the crust drying on the rim. It felt like a lifetime ago. I opened the pantry. It was stocked according to David's strict dietary laws: almond flour, kale chips, sugar-free, everything. I reached to the back to the very top shelf behind the oversized bag of quinoa. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. A tin of Danish butter cookies. The blue round tin. My mother had brought it over 6 months ago, the last time she was allowed to visit. David had tried to throw it out, calling it poison, but I had hidden it. I had saved it like a contraband treasure. I carried the tin back to the living room. I sat down on the floor right in the middle of the torn books and the spilled water. I struggled to open the lid, my weak fingers slipping until it popped off with a metallic clang. Inside, the cookies were nestled in their paper cups, smelling of butter and vanilla and normalcy. I took one. It was a pretzel shape with sugar crystals on top. I took a bite. It was sweet. It was unhealthy. It was dry and crumbly, and it choked me a little because my throat was so tight. But I chewed. I forced my jaw to work, ignoring the pain. I swallowed. And then I took another bite. I sat there in the dark eating cookies for dinner in a $2 million house that was finally silent. I wasn't happy. I wasn't healed. I was broken, bruised, and terrified of the morning. But as I sat there surrounded by the ruins of his empire, chewing on a piece of my mother's love, I realized something. The house wasn't white anymore. It was gray with shadows. It was messy. It was ugly. And for the first time in 10 years, it was mine. 3 weeks is a strange amount of time. It is long enough for the deep purple bruises on my face to fade into a sickly, jaundiced yellow that makeup can actually cover without effort, but short enough that I still wake up at 3:00 a.m., reaching for a hand that isn't there. The silence in the house has mutated again. It is no longer the terrifying quiet of a submarine, nor the hollow echo of a ruin. Now it is the dry, dusty silence of a warehouse. The pristine white minimalist sanctuary, once David's temple, has been desecrated by the chaotic reality of cardboard boxes, packing tape, and the dull gray bureaucracy of legal paperwork. I walk through the living room, weaving through stacks of bank records 2018-2023 and assets disputed, my bare feet collecting dust on the floor that David used to make me polish on my hands and knees. The ring light is gone, seized as evidence. The white rug is gone, rolled up and thrown in a skip because I couldn't look at the spot where I knelt without feeling the phantom pain in my knees. The house is being dismantled organ by organ, and I am the surgeon performing the autopsy on my own marriage. I stop by the kitchen island, now cluttered with takeout menus and unwashed mugs, a sight that would have given the old David an aneurysm. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, the taste bitter and grounding. It's funny what you miss when you're free. I don't miss him. I don't miss the fear. But I miss the structure. I miss the lie, because the lie was simple. If I am perfect, I am safe. Now there are no rules, and safety feels like a concept I imagined. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from a tabloid app I hadn't deleted yet. Joy Architects fall cult leader or misunderstood genius exclusive interview with defense team. I swiped it away without reading. The world outside these walls is loud, opinionated, and cruel. They call me a hero in one breath and a gold digger in the next. They analyze the video frame by frame, debating whether my tears were theatrical. I've learned that in America, even a victim must audition for the role, and if her performance isn't perfect, the audience turns on her. I moved to the hallway closet, the one under the stairs that David used to call the chaos bin, and forbade me from opening. This was where I had shoved everything that didn't fit his aesthetic, the ugly parts of our history. I needed to find my birth certificate for the lawyers, but as I pulled out a heavy plastic tote, the lid popped off, spilling its contents across the hardwood floor. It wasn't paperwork. It was us. Before the fame, before the 1,000,000 followers. I knelt down, sifting through the debris of a life that felt like it belonged to two strangers. A ticket stub from a minor league baseball game, a dried rose from our first Valentine's Day. And then my hand closed around something soft. a gray university hoodie fraying at the cuffs, smelling faintly of old cedar and cheap cologne. It was David's. The David he was 10 years ago. I held the fabric to my face, inhaling sharply, and suddenly, I wasn't in the hallway of a $2 million mansion. I was back in our cramped, leaky apartment in Chicago. It was raining. We were broke. David was sitting on the floor, surrounded by textbooks, stressing over his psychology finals. He looked up at me, his eyes tired but warm, actually. Warm, not the ring light glint he perfected later. He pulled me down into his lap, wrapping this very hoodie around my shoulders because the heating was broken. "One day, Sarah," he had whispered into my hair, "I'm going to build a house where you never have to be cold. I'm going to make sure you're always safe." He had kissed my forehead, a gentle, reverent touch. That man. He wasn't a monster. He was just a boy who wanted to be somebody, and I loved him. God help me, I loved him so much it felt like breathing. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. This is the part they don't tell you about leaving an abuser. You don't just mourn the abuse. You mourn the person they could have been. You mourn the potential. I hugged the hoodie to my chest and sobbed a quiet, jagged sound. How did that boy become the man who locked me in a chair? At what point did keeping me safe turn into keeping me prisoner? The tragedy wasn't just that he hurt me. It was that he killed the only version of himself that was worth saving. The moment of weakness was interrupted by the sharp chime of the doorbell. Not the police, not Martha. It was the courier I was expecting. I wiped my face with the sleeve of the old hoodie, a final ironic comfort, and stood up. I stuffed the gray fabric back into the box and shoved it deep into the dark. I couldn't live in the past. The past was a trap. I walked to the door, checking the security camera first. It was a bike messenger. I signed for the heavy envelope, my hand steady. It was from Rossi and Klein Family Law. I didn't open it immediately. I took it to the dining table, sitting in the chair where David used to preside like a king. I ripped open the seal. Inside was a summary of the negotiations from David's legal team. I read the cover letter, and the sadness I felt in the hallway evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury. David was in a holding cell, denied bail because of the flight risk, but his voice was still loud. Through his high-priced lawyers, he was launching a campaign of context. The letter outlined their defense strategy. Mr. Miller maintains that the video was taken out of context and represents a consensual role-play scenario aimed at therapeutic emotional release, a technique he is developing for his next book. He claims Mrs. Miller is leveraging this private moment for financial gain and defamation. They were going to paint me as a manipulative, unstable actress who consented to the torture. They were going to drag my mother's death through the mud again, claiming my grief made me unreliable. I threw the papers down. The audacity was breathtaking. Even in chains, he was trying to gaslight the jury pool. He was betting on the fact that the world loves a successful man more than it believes a battered woman. I looked at the second document. A settlement offer. $5 million. Immediate transfer. In exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement NDA, a retraction of public statements, and a joint press release stating the incident was a misunderstanding. $5 million. It was enough to buy a new life. Enough to disappear. Enough to never work again. It was go-away money. It was shut-up money. I stared at the zeros. 10 years ago, the David in the gray hoodie would have thought this was a fortune. Today, the David in the cell thought it was a muzzle. I grabbed my purse and the keys to the car, David's Tesla, which I still hadn't figured out how to fully operate, and drove. I drove past the manicured lawns of our gated community, past the gates that were meant to keep bad people out, but had only succeeded in locking a bad person in. I drove to downtown, to a glass skyscraper that looked like a needle piercing the sky. I took the elevator to the 40th floor. The sign on the door read, "Elena Rossi, attorney at law." I didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist took one look at my face, the face that had been on every news channel for 3 weeks, and buzzed me straight through. Elena Rossi was a small woman with hair the color of steel and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She was sitting behind a desk that was messy with files, eating a salad out of a plastic container. She didn't look like the polished corporate sharks David hired. She looked like a fighter. She wiped her mouth and pointed to the chair. "Sarah Miller," she said, her voice raspy like she smoked a pack a day. "You look better than you do on TV, but you look tired. Sit." I sat. I tossed the settlement offer onto her desk. "They offered $5 million, I said." Elena didn't even pick it up. She just glanced at the header. "Standard hush money," she scoffed, stabbing a cherry tomato. "They're scared. They know the criminal case is strong, but they want to save the brand. If you sign that, David gets to go on Oprah in 2 years and talk about his redemption arc and how he forgave his crazy wife. You get rich, but you get erased. Is that what you want?" She looked at me, chewing slowly. "Do you want to be rich, Sarah? Or do you want to be free?" I looked out the window at the city spread out below. I thought about the gray hoodie. I thought about the pancake batter. I thought about the smile trainer and the way my jaw still clicked when I chewed. If I took the money, I was validating his narrative. I was admitting that my pain had a price tag. "He says it was consensual," I said quietly. "He says I'm crazy. He's a narcissist." Elena shrugged. "That's what they do. They deny attack and reverse victim and offender. Darvo, it's page 1 of the playbook. The question is, are you going to let him write the ending of this book too?" She leaned forward, pushing the salad aside. "Here's the reality. If we go to trial, they will come for you. They will dig up your high school grades, your ex-boyfriends, your medical records. They will try to prove you are hysterical. It will be ugly. It will be public. And you might not get $5 million. You might just get half the assets and a restraining order. But—" she paused, her eyes softening just a fraction. "But you will own your name, and he will be a convicted felon." I reached into my bag and pulled out the only thing I had brought with me besides the papers. It wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It was the blue tin of Danish butter cookies. I placed it on the desk. "My mother gave me these," I said. "He told me they were poison. He told me sugar made me weak. For 3 years, I didn't eat a single cookie because I was afraid of disappointing him." I looked at Elena. "I don't want his money, Elena. I want his silence. I want him to know what it feels like to be unable to speak." Elena smiled. It was a wolfish, sharp smile. She opened her drawer and pulled out a fresh retainer agreement. "We don't sign NDAs in this office, Sarah. We sign subpoenas." She slid the paper toward me. "We're going to reject the settlement. And then, we're going to file a civil suit for damages alongside the criminal case. We're going to put every single text message, every email, every receipt from his Joy Architecture business into the public record. We're going to dismantle the myth." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name. Not Mrs. David Miller. Just Sarah. The ink looked dark and permanent on the white page. "Do it," I said. "Burn it all down." Elena took the paper back. "One more thing," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "David is trying to call you. From the jail. He's using his one phone call privileges through a loophole to try and reach your landline. Have you answered?" "No," I said. I unplugged the phone. "Good." Elena nodded. "But he's persistent. He sent a message through his lawyer. He wants you to know that he has the journals." The blood drained from my face. The room suddenly felt very cold. "The journals," I whispered. "He claims he has your personal journals from the last 5 years," Elena said, watching me closely. "The ones where you wrote about your darker thoughts, your depression. He says if you don't settle, he's going to release them. He says they prove you were suicidal and begged him to fix you." I gripped the arms of the chair. My journals. The ones I wrote in when I was at my lowest, when his gaslighting had made me question my own sanity. The pages where I blamed myself, where I wrote that I was a burden, where I wrote that maybe I deserved his discipline. If those came out of context, they would validate everything he said. They were the confession of a brainwashed hostage, but to the world they would look like the ramblings of a madwoman. He stole them, I breathed. I thought I lost them. He kept them, Elena corrected. As leverage. This is the threat, Sarah. If we proceed, he releases the journals. The world reads your darkest, most private shame. Are you still sure you want to do this? I closed my eyes. I saw the journals. I saw the tear stains on the pages. I saw the words "I hate myself" scrawled over and over. Shame burned in my chest, hot and suffocating. He still had a piece of me. He still had a weapon. But then I remembered the video. I remembered the look on Martha's face. I remembered the cookie. If I hid now, the journals would just be another secret keeping me sick. Let him release them, I said, opening my eyes. Let the world see what a woman writes when she is being tortured by her husband. It's not shame, Elena. It's evidence. Elena's smile widened. I think I'm going to like representing you, Sarah. The conference room at Rossi and Klein smelled of lemon polish and impending violence. It was a sterile aquarium of glass and mahogany perched 40 stories above the city, designed to make human conflict feel like a business transaction. I sat at the head of the long table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, to hide the fact that my cuticles were bleeding from where I had picked them raw. Elena sat beside me, a shark in a silk blouse, arranging her files with terrifying precision. Opposite us, 2 empty chairs waited like open graves. This was a deposition, a pre-trial discovery, but it felt more like an autopsy where I was both the corpse and the witness. The door opened, and the air in the room seemed to get sucked out. David walked in. He wasn't wearing the orange jumpsuit I had seen on the news. He was wearing a navy suit that was slightly too large for him, hanging off his shoulders, as if he had shrunk in the wash. His skin was gray, stripped of the spray tan and the studio lighting, and his hair, usually coiffed to perfection, was limp and thinning. He looked pathetic. He looked human. And that was the most dangerous thing about him. He didn't look at his lawyer, a slick man named Sterling with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked straight at me. He didn't glare. He didn't sneer. He looked at me with a devastating, mournful tenderness. He mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. My stomach lurched. It was a precision strike. He knew that anger fueled me, so he was offering me pity to disarm me. He sat down, his movements slow and humble, playing the role of the misunderstood saint to perfection. Sterling cleared his throat, opening a briefcase that clicked like a loading gun. Mrs. Miller, he began, his voice smooth and condescending. We are here to establish the context of the unfortunate events of last month. My client contends that your mental state was fragile, and that he was acting as a caretaker, not an aggressor. Would you agree that you have struggled with severe depression? I struggled with my husband, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Sterling smiled as if I had walked into a trap. Let's be specific. You kept journals, didn't you? Sarah, private diaries where you recorded your innermost thoughts. He reached into his briefcase and pulled it out, the black moleskin notebook. Seeing it in his hands felt like a physical violation. That book had lived under my pillow. It contained the raw, unfiltered sewage of my mind during the darkest nights of my marriage. David found these in the bedside table, Sterling said, tapping the leather cover. He kept them safe, because he was worried about you. He opened the book to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. October 14th, 2023. Read this entry for the record, please. He slid the book across the table. I looked down at my own handwriting. It was jagged, frantic, written with a heavy hand that nearly tore the paper. I am a burden. I am a black hole sucking the light out of him. He tries so hard to fix me, but I am broken. I deserve the dark. I just want to stop feeling. I want to sleep and never wake up. The words swam before my eyes. Shame, hot and suffocating, flooded my veins. In that room under the fluorescent lights, those words didn't look like abuse. They looked like a confession of insanity. David was watching me, his eyes wide and sad, nodding encouragingly as if to say, "See, you were sick. I was helping." Sterling leaned forward. "You wrote that you deserve the dark, Sarah. Did David put you in the dark, or did you ask for it? Did you ask him to help you stop feeling?" Quoi? Elena's hand shot out, covering the page. "Objection. You are taking the ramblings of a woman in distress and twisting them into consent for torture." Sterling leaned back, looking satisfied. "It goes to state of mind, counsel. If she believed she deserved punishment if she begged for discipline to cure her depression, then the video we saw wasn't assault. It was assisted therapy. Role play. A desperate husband trying to save a suicidal wife from herself." He looked at me. "Did you write this, Sarah?" I looked at David. He was leaning forward, his eyes pleading. "Admit it," his look said. "Admit you're crazy and we can all go home." I took a breath. The air tasted of lemon and lies. I remembered writing that entry. I remembered why. "I wrote it," I said quietly. Sterling smirked. "Thank you. No further. I wrote it," I interrupted, my voice rising, "because that was the night David told me that if I didn't stop crying about my miscarriage, he would leave me." The silence in the room shattered. David flinched. Sterling stopped writing. "I wrote that I was a burden, because for 6 hours straight he sat by the bed and listed every dollar he had spent on my IVF treatments, calling them bad investments. I wrote that I deserved the dark because he had unscrewed the light bulbs in the bedroom to save electricity, until I learned to be grateful." I looked Sterling dead in the eye. "That is not a diary of a suicidal woman, Mr. Sterling. That is the transcript of his voice in my head. He dictated those feelings to me day by day until I wrote them down just to get them out of my brain." "That is a creative interpretation," Sterling sneered, trying to regain control. "But the words are, 'I deserve the dark,' not 'David put me in the dark.'" He reached for another document. "We have statements from your friends, or rather, former friends. People who say you withdrew, you became paranoid. We are building a picture here, Sarah. A picture of a woman who was falling apart and a husband who was holding her together. The jury will see a man who tried everything, even unconventional methods, to snap his wife out of a catatonic state." He gestured to David. "Look at him. Does he look like a monster? Or does he look like a man who is exhausted from caring for you?" It was a good narrative. It was terrifyingly effective. In the absence of physical bruises which had now healed, it was his word against my crazy journal entries. I could feel the walls closing in. Maybe the jury would believe him. Maybe the smile trainer would be explained away as a medical device. Maybe I would lose. I looked at Elena. She wasn't panicking. She was checking her watch. "Are you finished character assassinating my client, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice bored. "Because we have a tight schedule." Sterling laughed. "We have barely begun. We have years of these journals. We will go through every page. You won't need to," Elena said, opening her own file folder. "Because while you were busy reading Sarah's private thoughts, we were busy looking into your client's business expenses." She pulled out a single sheet of paper. "David claims the smile trainer was a one-time therapeutic improvisation for Sarah, correct?" "Absolutely." David spoke up for the first time, his voice raspy. "I bought it as a gag gift but used it in a moment of crisis." Elena slid the paper across the table. It wasn't a journal entry. It was an invoice. "Then can you explain why Joy Architecture LLC purchased 12 of these devices over the last 4 years, and why they were shipped to 12 different addresses?" David froze. The sad husband mask slipped, revealing the flash of pure panic I had seen on the live stream. Sterling snatched the paper. "What is this?" Elena continued, relentless. "We tracked the shipping orders. We found the women. It turns out Sarah wasn't the first project. She was just the only one he married." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "And we have someone here who can explain the logistics. Someone who managed your schedule, David." Someone you fired because she asked why you were ordering medical restraints on the company card. The door to the conference room opened again. David turned around, and for the first time he looked truly terrified. Walking in was a young woman with bright red hair and a nervous demeanor. She was clutching a purse, but her chin was high. It was Chloe, his former personal assistant from 2 years ago. The girl David had told me was fired for stealing petty cash. The girl he had ruined. Chloe looked at David, then she looked at me. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a shared silent recognition of a nightmare survived. "Hello, David," Chloe said, her voice shaking but audible. "I kept the receipts." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "This is an ambush. This witness was not on the list. This is a deposition, Mr. Sterling." Elena said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "We are discovering the truth. And the truth is, your client isn't a caretaker. He's a serial collector." She turned to me. "Sarah, would you like to introduce Chloe to the record?" I looked at Chloe. I remembered how she used to look at me with pity when I came to the office with heavy makeup. I thought she was judging me. Now I knew she was trying to signal me. "Yes," I said, feeling the weight of the journals lift off my shoulders. "This is Chloe, and I think she has a story to tell." The stack of papers Chloe placed on the mahogany table didn't make a loud thud. It was a soft sliding hiss like a snake moving through dry grass, but the impact was heavier than a gavel strike. In the sterile, air-conditioned silence of the conference room, those papers screamed. Sterling David's slick defense attorney stared at the documents as if they were radioactive. He didn't touch them. He knew what they were. Every lawyer knows the smell of a case dying in real time. David, however, was still trying to act the part of the wronged CEO. He leaned back in his chair, feigning a look of bored disappointment, but I saw the telltale twitch in his jaw muscle. It was the same twitch he used to get right before he told me I was vibrating at a low frequency. He looked at Chloe, the girl he had fired, humiliated, and labeled a thief, and tried to wither her with a glare. But Chloe wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt, drawing strength from the fact that for the first time, she wasn't the only one in the room who knew the truth. "These are the credit card statements from the corporate Amex for the years 2019 through 2023. Chloe said, her voice thin but clear. David listed them as research and development or medical consulting. But if you cross-reference the SKUs, they aren't for books or software." She reached out and flipped the top page over. "They are for the Smile Trainer, Model X7, the pediatric size." The air left my lungs. Pediatric. Small enough for a woman's face. Small enough to hurt. "He didn't just buy them," Chloe continued, gaining momentum. "He had them shipped to residential addresses. Not the office, not the warehouse. Apartments." She pointed to a list of names highlighted in yellow. Julia in 2019, Monica in 2020, Jessica in 2021, and then Sarah. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. I thought they were just girlfriends he was buying weird gifts for. Until I saw the NDA payouts. Sterling finally moved. He snatched the paper, scanning the highlighted names. His face went pale. "These are settlements," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Consulting fees." David corrected sharply, his voice tight. "They were beta testers for my coaching program. They signed contracts. They were paid for their time and confidentiality. They were paid to disappear." "David, hi." Chloe's voice cracked loud and startling. "I called them. After Sarah went live. I found Julia. She's still in therapy. She told me about the closet. She told me about the darkness discipline. She told me you made her thank you after you hit her." Chloe looked at Sterling. "They are all ready to talk. I gave their contact info to Elena. They aren't scared anymore because they know they aren't alone." The silence that followed was absolute. The narrative of the crazy, suicidal wife had just been nuked. This wasn't a domestic dispute, it was a serial operation. I looked at David, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see the man I loved. I didn't even see a monster. I saw a factory foreman, a man who ran an assembly line of abuse, treating women like raw materials to be molded, used, and discarded when they cracked. The realization washed over me, cold and clarifying. I wasn't special. My pain wasn't unique. My special connection with him was just a script he had rehearsed on 3 other women before me. It hurt God, it hurt to know I was just a number, but it was also the key to my cell. If I wasn't the only one, then I wasn't the problem. "You incompetent little rat!" David hissed, abandoning the sad husband act entirely. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the water pitcher jump. He pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. "I picked you up from nothing, I gave you a career, and you steal my files. You violate my privacy." He turned on Sterling, his face purple with rage. "Do something, shut her up. Sue her for breach of contract. That's why I pay you $500 an hour, isn't it? Fix this." Sterling slowly closed the file folder. He looked at David with the cold, detached expression of a professional who realizes his client is a liability. "Mr. Miller," Sterling said calmly, "you told me this was an isolated incident. You told me Sarah was mentally unstable. You did not tell me there was a pattern of behavior involving multiple women and hush money." He pushed the file away. "I cannot fix perjury, David. And I cannot defend a predator who lied to his own counsel." "I didn't lie," David screamed, standing up. The chair flew back and hit the wall. "I was helping them. They were broken. All of them, needy, desperate, chaotic women who begged for structure. I gave them purpose. I gave them a brand." He looked at me, his eyes wild and manic. "Sarah, tell them. Tell them how much better you felt when you followed the rules. Tell them about the peace." He was unraveling. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the delusional narcissist underneath. He truly believed it. He believed he was the savior of the women he tortured. It was terrifying, and it was pathetic. "Sit down, David," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his shouting like a razor. "You didn't give us peace. You gave us silence. There is a difference." Sterling rubbed his temples. "We are done here," he said, signaling to the court reporter to stop typing. "Elena, can we speak in the hallway?" Elena didn't move. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, a smile playing on her lips. "I don't think so, Arthur. I think we have everything we need right here." She opened a new folder, a red one. "Here is the situation, David. We have Chloe's testimony. We have the financial records. We have 3 other victims willing to testify to a pattern of abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. And we have Sarah's video." She slid the red folder across the table. "If we go to trial, you will lose. You will lose your company. You will lose every dime you have to civil suits. And you will go to prison for 20 years minimum. The press will feast on you. You'll be the face of toxic masculinity for a generation." David slumped back into his chair, breathing hard. The fight drained out of him as the reality of the numbers hit. He looked at the red folder. "What is that?" he croaked. "That," Elena said, "is a plea deal. You plead guilty to all charges. You accept a 15-year sentence. You liquidate your assets to pay damages to Sarah and the other victims. And you issue a public allocation, a confession admitting that your method was abuse." She leaned forward. "In exchange, we don't go to trial. We don't drag Julia and Monica onto the stand. The media circus ends. You go away quietly. 15 years. I stared at the folder. It felt like justice, but it also felt insufficient. How do you quantify 10 years of stolen life in months of prison time? But then I looked at Chloe, who was shaking. I thought about the other women terrified of reliving their trauma in a courtroom. If he took the deal, it stopped here. The bleeding stopped. David stared at the table. He was calculating. He was a businessman until the end. He knew the math. Trial meant destruction. The deal meant survival. however diminished. He looked up, but not at Elena. He looked at me. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "I'll sign it," he said softly. Sterling let out a breath he had been holding. Elena reached for her pen. "Good. We can draft the on one condition." David interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. He didn't break eye contact with me. "I want to talk to Sarah, alone." Elena slammed her hand on the table. "Absolutely not. You are a violent offender. You do not get private access to the victim." 5 minutes. David pleaded, desperation leaking into his tone. "In the holding room, glass partition, guards outside, no lawyers, just us." He looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I need to know something. And I think she needs to know something too. If you give me 5 minutes, I sign the confession today. If not, I'll take my chances at trial. I'll drag every single one of those girls through the mud. I'll make it a circus." "It's blackmail," Sterling muttered, disgusted. "It's leverage," David corrected. "Sarah, please, one last conversation. Then I disappear forever." The room turned to me. Elena was shaking her head vigorously. "Don't do it." Her eyes screamed. "It's a trap. He wants to manipulate you one last time." Chloe looked terrified. Sterling looked indifferent. They were all waiting for the victim to decide. I looked at David. He looked small in that oversized suit. He wasn't the giant who filled the room anymore. He was just a man. A bad man, but a man. And inside me, a strange curiosity began to uncoil. Why, what could he possibly have to say? Was it an apology? A curse? Or did he just want to see if he still had the power to make me jump? But there was something else. A question that had been haunting me since I found that gray hoodie. When did the boy I loved die? If I didn't ask him, I would wonder forever. I would spend the next 15 years having conversations with a ghost in my head. I needed to see him not as the joy architect, not as the defendant, but as David. I needed to look him in the eye and feel nothing. If I could do that, I was truly free. "I'll do it," I said. "Sarah, no." Elena hissed, grabbing my arm. "You don't owe him anything. He's trying to get inside your head." "I know," I said, gently removing her hand. "But I need to evict him." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I felt surprisingly calm. The fear that usually accompanied his name was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical resolve. 5 minutes, David, and if you try to gaslight me, I walk out and we see you in court." David nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a gambler who just got one last spin at the wheel. 5 minutes, he agreed. The holding room was small, painted a depressing shade of beige divided by a thick pane of reinforced glass. It smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The guard locked the door behind me and stood outside, his silhouette visible through the small window. David was already sitting on the other side, his hands cuffed to the table. The barrier between us was thick, bulletproof, soundproof. We had to use the intercom phones to speak. It felt fitting. Our marriage had always been a conversation through a barrier, his ego, his rules, his lies. I sat down on the metal stool. I picked up the black plastic receiver. It was cold against my ear. David picked up his. We stared at each other. The silence stretched heavy and thick. "You look tired," he said finally. His voice sounded tinny and distant through the speaker. It lacked the bass, the resonance that used to command a room. It was just a voice. "I'm busy cleaning up your mess." I replied, my voice flat. "What do you want, David?" "You have 4 minutes left." He leaned forward, his forehead almost touching the glass. His eyes searched my face, scanning for the bruises, for the fear, for the love. He looked desperate to find a reflection of himself in me. "I wanted to ask you," he whispered, his eyes intense, "about the night of the live stream. The pancakes." I frowned. "The pancakes?" "Of all the things, the abuse. The jail time. The money. He wanted to talk about breakfast. What about them? I asked. You made them perfectly. He said, a strange, dreamy look in his eyes. Even though you were plotting to destroy me, even though you hated me, you flipped them perfectly. Circles. Golden brown. He paused, and his expression shifted into something darker, something chilling. I need to know, Sarah, did you poison them? Did you put something in them? Because after I ate them, I felt weak. I felt like I couldn't think straight. That's why I lost control. That's why I got angry. I stared at him, stunned. I almost laughed. Even here in handcuffs facing 15 years, he couldn't accept that he was flawed. He couldn't accept that he had simply lost. He had to invent a conspiracy. He had to believe I had drugged him to explain his own failure. It was the ultimate delusion. No, David, I said, shaking my head. I didn't poison the pancakes. They were just flour and milk. I leaned in closer to the glass. You felt weak because for the first time in 10 years you were in a room with someone who wasn't afraid of you. That wasn't poison. That was reality. David blinked. The explanation didn't satisfy him. He couldn't process it. He shook his head. No. No, you loved me. You needed me. You wrote it in the journals. He looked at me with genuine confusion. Why did you do it, Sarah? We were a team. We were a brand. Why did you burn it down? Because you killed my mother, I said. It wasn't literally true the stroke killed her, but in every way that mattered he had prevented me from saying goodbye. He had desecrated her memory. And then, you tried to kill me. Not my body, but me, Sarah. I looked at the clock. 1 minute left. I didn't come here to explain myself, David. I came here to see if you were still in there. The boy in the gray hoodie. I looked at his eyes, cold, selfish, empty. But he's gone? You ate him? David's face twisted. The vulnerability vanished. The monster surfaced one last time, thrashing against the glass. You'll never be happy, he spat into the phone. You're a follower, Sarah. You need a leader. You'll find another man and you'll let him control you because that's what you are. You're a victim. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just watched him scream, his spit hitting the glass. It was like watching a muted TV. Time's up, I said. I hung up the phone. His voice cut off instantly. I watched his mouth moving, forming silent curses. I stood up. I placed my hand on the glass right over his heart. He stopped screaming. He looked at my hand. Then I turned around and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I walked out into the hallway where Elena and Chloe were waiting. They looked at me anxiously. Did he sign? Elena asked. He will, I said, walking past them toward the exit. He knows it's the only way to keep the last shred of his dignity. I pushed open the heavy doors of the courthouse, stepping out into the blinding afternoon sun. The air was hot and thick with city smog, but to me it smelled like oxygen. I took a deep breath. What now? Chloe asked, jogging to catch up with me. I stopped on the steps, looking down at the busy street. People were rushing by, living their messy, uncurated lives. No ring lights, no scripts. Just chaos. It was beautiful. Now, I said, I'm going to learn how to make a mistake. It has been 365 days since I walked out of that courthouse, and if you saw me today, you probably wouldn't recognize the woman who used to live in the white glass box on the hill. My life now fits into a 600-square-foot studio apartment in the artist's district, a place that smells permanently of turpentine roasting coffee and the damp earth of the 27 houseplants I've managed to keep alive. There is no white furniture here. My sofa is a velvet green monstrosity I found at a flea market, covered in cat hair from the stray tabby I adopted and named Chaos. My rug is a riot of Persian reds and oranges, and there is a stain on it from where I spilled red wine 3 months ago and just didn't clean it up immediately. I looked at the stain, and instead of having a panic attack about polluting the sanctuary, I just thought, well, that happened. And then I finished my glass. You see, silence used to feel like a heavy wool blanket that smothered me while I was wide awake. But the silence here is different. It's light. It's porous. It lets in the sounds of the city, the sirens, the laughter from the bar downstairs, the messy, chaotic soundtrack of people living their lives without a script. I work 3 blocks away at a community center teaching watercolor painting to elementary school kids. David would have hated it. He hated children, he called them unregulated variables, and he hated mess. But I love them. I love the way they attack the paper with no fear mixing colors until they turn into brown sludge drawing trees that look like lollipops and suns that have smiley faces. Yesterday, a little girl named Maya knocked over a jar of blue water all over my favorite jeans. She started to cry, terrified, waiting for the punishment. She had that look in her eyes, the same look I used to have when I broke a glass. I just knelt down, dipped my finger in the puddle on the floor, and drew a blue heart on her nose. "It's just water, Maya," I told her. "Now we're part of the painting." She giggled. That sound, that tiny bubble of relief, was better than any applause David ever got on a stage. It was the sound of a cycle breaking. I'm not rich anymore. The lawsuit took most of the assets, and what was left went to paying Elena and the therapists for the other women. I drive a dented Honda. I buy groceries with coupons. But I am rich in the only currency that matters. I own my own mistakes. When I got home this evening, the sun was setting, casting long, dusty shadows across my cluttered kitchen table. And there, sitting on top of a stack of unpaid bills, was an envelope. It was white, stark, and official, stamped with the seal of the State Department of Corrections. It was the letter. I had known it was coming. Elena had warned me that David was eligible for limited correspondence privileges after his first year of good behavior. I stood there holding my keys, my heart doing a strange little flutter, not of fear, but of remembrance. A year ago, this letter would have paralyzed me. I would have analyzed the handwriting, looked for hidden messages, wondered if I was in trouble. Now I just felt a weary annoyance, like finding a parking ticket on my windshield. I picked it up. The paper felt cheap and gritty. I walked over to the sink, cleared away a dirty cereal bowl, and tore it open. "My dearest Sarah," it began. The handwriting was smaller, cramped, lacking the flamboyant loops of his signature Joy Architect autograph. "I am writing this from a place of deep spiritual reflection. Being in here has given me time to think about our journey. I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgive you for the anger that led you to betray our covenant. I know that you were acting out of your own trauma, and I hold no space for resentment in my heart. I pray every day that you find the structure you so desperately need without my guidance. If you ever want to visit to clear the air for your own closure, I am here. Love, David." I read it twice. The first time I felt a flash of the old nausea, the instinctive urge to defend myself, to scream, "I didn't betray you. I escaped you." But the second time I read it, I started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a genuine, belly-shaking chuckle of disbelief. Even in prison, wearing a jumpsuit, eating cafeteria slop, he was still trying to be the bigger person. "I forgive you." It was a masterclass in narcissism. He hadn't changed. He hadn't learned. He was still the hero of his own delusional movie, and I was just the wayward supporting character he was graciously offering to redeem. He thought this letter was a hook, a way to drag me back into the debate, to get me to write back and argue, to re-engage with his reality. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a box of kitchen matches. I didn't strike the match with anger. I didn't make a ceremony out of it. I just lit it, held the corner of the paper to the flame, and dropped it into the stainless steel sink. I watched the words curl and blacken. "Dearest Sarah" vanished. "I forgive you" turned to ash. Guidance disappeared in a puff of gray smoke. It wasn't a violent act. It was an administrative one. I was simply filing his opinion in the only place it belonged, the garbage. I turned on the faucet and washed the ash down the drain. It swirled away, gone in seconds. I didn't feel lighter because I wasn't carrying the weight anymore to begin with. I just felt hungry. A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the cavalry. I opened it to find Chloe standing there struggling with 2 large pizza boxes and a bottle of wine that definitely cost less than $10. Chloe looked different too. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob and dyed it purple, a color David would have called unprofessional. She was working as a paralegal for Elena, now helping other women construct their exit strategies. "I come bearing carbs and cheap booze," she announced, kicking the door shut behind her. "And don't judge me, but I asked for extra pineapple." I took the boxes, the heat seeping through the cardboard warming my hands. "Pineapple is chaotic evil," I said, grinning. "I love it." We sat on the floor using the coffee table as a dining room, eating straight from the box. We didn't talk about David. That was our rule. We had spent enough hours dissecting him, analyzing him, surviving him. Now we talked about Chloe's new boyfriend, a guy who worked in IT and thought she was a genius. We talked about my students. We talked about a new TV show we were hate watching. The conversation was easy, flowing, full of interruptions and mouthful of food laughter. At one point, Chloe told a joke, something stupid about a penguin, and I threw my head back and laughed so hard that wine came out of my nose. We both shrieked, gasping for air, clutching our stomachs. In the middle of the laughter, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The lighting was unflattering. My hair was messy, pulled up in a clip with strands falling in my face. There was a smear of pizza sauce on my chin. And around my eyes there were deep, crinkling lines. Crow's feet. David used to tell me those lines were structural failures of the face. He wanted me to get Botox. He wanted me to wear the smile trainer to smooth out the trauma of aging. I stopped laughing for a second and leaned forward, looking closely at my reflection. I touched the lines at the corners of my eyes. They were deep, they were permanent, and they were beautiful. They were the evidence that I had smiled, really smiled with my whole face, not just my mouth, more in the last year than I had in the previous 10. They were the topography of my freedom. "You okay?" Chloe asked, pausing with a slice halfway to her mouth. "You went quiet." I turned back to her, and I felt the smile spread across my face again, feeling the delicious, unrestricted stretch of my muscles. My jaw didn't click anymore. My heart didn't race. "I'm better than okay," I said, raising my glass. "I was just admiring my wrinkles." Chloe snorted. "You're weird, Sarah." "I know," I said. "Isn't it wonderful?" Later that night, after Chloe left, I opened the window to let the cool night air in. The city was alive below me, a grid of imperfect lights. I thought about the perfect life I used to have: the white walls, the high-definition cameras, the carefully curated happiness that shattered at the slightest touch. It was a cage made of glass. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dried paint from the class blue and green specks under my fingernails. They were working hands. Healing hands. I walked over to the easel in the corner of the room. There was a blank canvas waiting there. For months I had been afraid to touch it. I was afraid that if I tried to paint something real, it wouldn't be good enough. It wouldn't be perfect. But tonight, perfection felt like a bore. Perfection was a prison. I squeezed a tube of bright, violent yellow onto the palette, then a glob of dark, messy red. I picked up the biggest brush I had. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a sketch. I just touched the brush to the canvas and dragged it across the white space, destroying the emptiness with color. I made a mistake immediately, a drip of paint that ran down the wrong way. I watched it trickle down, ruining the line I had intended. I smiled. I didn't wipe it away. I painted around it. I turned the mistake into a tree trunk. I turned the mess into a garden. David was right about one thing: I am nothing without him. I am nothing like the woman he made. I am messy. I am loud. I am aging. And in this small, cluttered, beautiful apartment, for the first time in my life, I am complete.